In this week's guest podcast of the week, James E. interviews author Donald Nicolson about his book, For a Chance to Forget.
Let's get to the book then. For a Chance to Forget, something that a lot of us would like to do in many situations.
Well, that was an apt title that I went. It's not something that I just suddenly threw out over the course of a weekend during the pandemic. Not at all. It's something that I've been working on for many years before it even saw the light of day. So I don't know if it would help you if I shared my story about how I came to write it. Would that be?
Yeah, that'd be good.
Yeah, so obviously for people that know, people who've read it, it's a book it's a novel set in the Netherlands, and it's a place that I know dearly, having travelled to about, I think between 2001 and 2011, I must have travelled to it about 20 odd times or something like that, which would probably get some people thinking that I was a courier of some sort. Not at all. Maybe I should have done that, would have made more money, but no. I first went there obviously because I'd met someone and there was a long distance relationship, but back in 2004 when that ended and I was changing jobs and lots of other things, I just thought, well, what the hell, I want to have a weekend break. I've been slogging out for the last 9 months. It's been really difficult. I just need a break before I start my new post, which was an author one down in England. And I just thought, well, what the hell for the hell, but let's go back to the Netherlands. First time going there and not meeting up with anyone in particular. And I went along there, and it was a Friday evening, about 5:30, 6 o'clock. All the offices were closing, all the shops were closing, so the shoppers of the day were leaving Utrecht the Oudergracht. That's the main canal in the centre of the city, which has bars, restaurants and shops lined around it. So it was a bit quieter, but it was a lovely balmy summer's evening, and I just found myself in a moment where I thought, do you know what, I love this place more than I loved her. This isn't going to be going out to the Netherlands by any chance, is it?
No, unless somebody picks it up on the internet, no.
Oh, right.
I mean, it's a podcast, so, it will be broadcast on the radio, but then it goes up on a podcasting site.
Yeah. Ask my mother-in-law from Italy now knows I was joking. One of the things that I had to learn when I first started living with my mother-in-law was to be able to say I'm joking in Italian so that she wasn't confused. Scherzando is. I was actually joking about that. It's okay if the podcast goes to the Netherlands or whatever, but I digress. Anyway, so where was that? Oh yeah, Utrecht. So I found myself in that moment, and I think it was at that moment in 2004 where I really first started to appreciate the city of Utrecht itself, because before then it'd always just been a backdrop. And that moment I was free to indulge, go where I wanted, learn about the place, the history, the culture, and that was what really got me started. So one of the things that I've always done as a traveller is to carry a travelogue, a little notebook that I would keep my notes in, my plans, my prospective plans, and then on the other side I would have my reflections on what I'd seen, places I'd been to, what I'd ate, what I'd drank, what the weather was like, all the general stuff. And so I had, by that point, 2011, I had 10 years of that all that material built up and more. And I suppose it was round about that point where I started thinking, well, maybe I could write something about Utrecht at some point in time. And the chance came for me in 2015 when I was very fortunate to write a travel article that got published in the Scotsman newspaper, which was about Utrecht. And the tag for that was that at the time Utrecht was the international city starting point for the Tour de France. And months in advance, when I found out about that, I started sending around to various newspapers, got an idea, would you like this article? And Scotsman said, okay, we'll run with it. So I did that, but it was obvious it was one page.
Yeah.
So there wasn't a lot of, well, there was a lot that I managed to get in, basically the condensed highlights of Utrecht for anyone that would be interested in seeing it. But I had a lot of material on the cutting room floor, and I tried to surreptitiously shoehorn that into a book that I wrote about academic conferences, but it never made it there again. It fell onto the cutting room floor, so it was left lying around, and I was basically saying, well, one of the things that I hate is to have writing that I've done, regardless of how old it is, that's not seen the light of day. If it's there, even if 99% of it's crap, there might be something in the 1% that's worth sharing with someone somewhere along the line. And I started digging around with that and had a few ideas on, well, maybe I could write a travel book in Utrecht. Going to be a bit of a short book, maybe. And eventually, one day, I think it was on holiday, sitting poolside in 2017, I think it was, that I suddenly came up with the idea, well, what if I was to write a novel? That would give me the freedom to basically write about anything I wanted to, and I could use all the material in Utrecht. And that was where the idea for A Chance to Forget came from, quite simply.
I found it really interesting, the format that it was written in, like emails, text, letters, that kind of thing. Was that a conscious decision to do it that way, or did it just kind of evolve?
No, that was something that I identified very early on. It came to me, well, if I'm going to have the story based around a relationship and one that's a distance, then one of the things that lies at the heart of any long distance or even short distance relationship is communications, be that spoken or written. So how do I show that? And that gives me a way to introduce the characters and motivations or points of view, and allows me to develop their career arcs. So that was something that jumped out at me very quickly, and I just thought, well, if I'm going to do that, I might as well just go wild with it. There's no one stopping me. This is what I want to do, so let's go for it.
Yeah. I mean, for me personally, I think it made it more interesting than if it was just a sort of straightforward, normal, novel, first chapter, second chapter, third chapter, that sort of idea. It gave me much more of an insight to the individual characters, Sani and John. And it made me think about, if I was in that sort of position, would I be doing the same kind of thing, or would it be something that, I would give up on quite quickly? Having
that freedom to use the email and the written letter and all the other forms of written communication, what I was trying to do was the classic in literature, show, don't tell. So rather than telling people this is how they felt that day, this is what they said, blah, blah, blah. I thought, let's not even bother with that whatsoever. Let's just go for, this is what the person's thinking, this is what they're saying. Go for it, run with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I think, for me, I think it's a formula that certainly works in the context of this book. I don't think I've ever read another book that's written the same way, so I can't, gauge it against something else. But I think I'd like to read more books that were written that way, if I'm being honest.
I'm not going to promise you a sequel that's written like that. I'm not going to promise anyone a sequel. To be honest, I did originally think, well, it would be good to follow it up afterwards. And at the end of last year, I had a bit of free time and I jotted down some ideas. And I thought, okay, so we'll take it up. We'll skip 2004 to about 2019. And we'll just go to where we are at the end of 2019. And this is what's going to be following them up. So there'll be a massive jump and it'll be even more exciting. And we'll obviously add in a few of the current socio-cultural political elements. So I started noting down all the things that were happening in January of 2020, and I just had to give up. I went, the world is changing week by week. If you think back to January of 2020, when Trump was calling on his cronies to move to the Capitol and everything else, and obviously with the pandemic playing out the way that's playing out, I think for myself, I don't think I could write something at the moment that would be based on the current climate we're living in that would really be able to capture a moment and put a full stop in it, because things are just evolving week by week.
Well, exactly. I mean, it's the sort of nature of the beast, as it were, that we thought we had it beaten, and they relaxed the rules, and then all of a sudden it came back with a fiercer attitude, if you like. And it's just that, from my own personal point of view, I think that the Scottish Government has got it right, and that they're quite slow about, opening things up. I completely understand the frustration that people get with it, but I always think to myself, it's better that we get this under proper control and don't lose any more people.
Yeah. But it is a concern that there's so many people. I think there's been about 6,000 or 7,000 in the last 3 or 4 days that have contracted the virus that we know of. And as I've been saying, it's because older people and people who are at risk have been fully vaccinated now. That the virus has to survive, and that's what viruses want to do. To survive, it has to find someone else, and it looks for younger people who are perhaps a bit more carefree, less cautious when it comes to masking and everything else, and socially distancing. And we are probably seeing the variants and everything spreading through younger people, and that's going to keep it going. And so vaccination's not going to break the chain this year, possibly.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's assume that, they get it all sorted out. At that point, would you revisit the possibility of the sequel?
Well, it all depends where I am in terms of space and time. That I don't mean in a sort of 1967 Haight-Ashbury way, but more in a, do I have the physical space and do I have the time to focus on it? Then certainly it's something that I would be interested in. the way that I wrote the book, and I don't want to give away the game to anyone that's listening to this and hasn't read it. Should probably say that it's available at Amazon if anyone types in the name For a Chance to Forget. That took years of practice. That's my sales pitch. Brilliant it was. The way that I wrote it was to deliberately leave things slightly open at the end for following up at some point in time. And when I actually published it, there were two things when I published it. The first was that I sat on it basically for about 6 months from, I think I'd finished it around about November of 2019 and just let it lie until May of 2020. And then I just started working on it again. Might even been longer, maybe August or September, and then just tidied up. But the thing that kept me going for a while with it was the ending. And I did have different endings that I was playing with, but I went for the one that I in particular chose, which I thought would be more impactful and one that allows me to take it on further in a sequel one day. Or
Yeah.
maybe not, who knows?
Yeah, I must admit, when I came to the end of the book, it felt quite natural for it to finish there. And therefore, if there wasn't ever going to be a follow-up, it's not something that would be gnawing at the back of my mind, what's happened afterwards. But by the same token, I could see how you had kind of left the door ajar, if you like, so that if you did go back, it would. But it wouldn't. I kind of thought to myself that it wouldn't be something that would get taken up almost straight away, if you know what I mean. As you said earlier, I had this image in my own mind that it would probably be maybe a couple of years or something like that would have passed, and the next book would take up the story again after that period.
Yeah, obviously, and I'm not giving the game away. The advertising line that I have for the book is For a Chance to Forget, the story of how two people in a nation changed over 3 years. And it's no secret who the two people are when people get to about page 6 or 7. Although there's actually deliberately no page numbers in the book. But the nation part is, as they very quickly find out as well, the nation that changes is the Netherlands. And I think one of the things that I've tried to capture is how the Netherlands, in my opinion, changed from 2001 to 2004. Although we could say that of any nation. But I think there was definitely a sea change in the Netherlands over that time. I did notice a change from when I first went there and was completely naive to the land back in 2001 to how it was in 2004.
Yeah, I must admit, I've been to the Netherlands a few times, admittedly, predominantly to Amsterdam. But after reading your book, I must admit, when I'm able to travel, I definitely think I'll go to Utrecht. Just to see for it, see it for myself, because the picture that I built up in my mind through, your description of it, made me think that it's probably better than, going to Amsterdam, in the sense that it's perhaps not as touristy.
Yeah, a million times better. The easiest way to describe it is, to anyone that's not been there, is imagine what if someone hasn't been to Amsterdam or Utrecht. I would say to them, imagine what you would hope Amsterdam to be like without the crowds, without the cliches.
Yeah.
And that's what you get with Utrecht. It's for us. as I allude to in the book, it's not just, obviously with Utrecht there's the two main things that you cannot miss are the Oudergracht, which is the main canal running through the centre of the city, and obviously the Netherlands is a land of canals. That's how it exists and isn't water world. But the other thing is the Domtoren and Domkerk, and that's the cathedral that was built in 1200s or something, and the tower that was attached to it. But they got in 1674, I think it was, they were detached by a hurricane, and they just decided to leave it at that. They didn't bother putting them back together, and that's something that actually works really well. You wouldn't notice if you didn't know that story. You would think,
Yeah.
Here's a tower that just happens to be beside a cathedral, but they're both wonderful, and there's so many great churches in and around the centre of Utrecht that are worth anyone taking a moment of their time to look at and enjoy.
And I might have picked this up wrong, I don't know. Is the book a little bit autobiographical? In as much as you have experience of, going to Utrecht and what have you?
Well, if we want to be really, really concrete and say, is this book based on my travels, then of course it is, because I travelled to Utrecht and I know the centre of the city, etc., etc. And that's where it stops. People have asked me, well, is it about you? Are you John? No. I've never worked in journalism. Don't know the first thing about it. Probably wouldn't be any good at it either. Is Sani someone that you met? No. However, it does help that I've been there so many times that I did get a handle on the city, the culture, the people, and that helped me to develop it and write it more so.
Yeah, the only reason I asked the question is that I've read another series of books by another author, and it is pretty much, semi-autobiographical. The main character in it is him, and it is now his wife. But obviously he's changed, certain other bits and pieces of information, because, they're talking about real people, so you can't always name names, as it were, But obviously the kind of historical facts, that are around about at the time when he was writing these books, are all accurate, But I picked up quite quickly with that book, within book one of that series, that, this was based, albeit kind of loosely, on the author. So when I had read your book, I had that sort of question in my mind. I wasn't sure, if I was seeing the same thing or if I was making myself see the same thing because of the previous books that I had read. So I had to ask that question.
It's a question I get all the time. But honestly, as I said, when I came up with the idea that I could write a novel, or at least I thought I could write a novel, I just thought, right, let's run with it. These characters are going to be blah, blah, blah. And it started off on paper as one thing, and it just evolved. And I was just letting my imagination run with me. And so, for example, John works in journalism, and one of the things that inspired me to follow that route was the Leveson inquiry and all the things that were going on there. So I thought, well, he might have been involved in something that was going on round about that time that eventually got picked up. We could maybe build that into it.
Mm, yeah, because I think a lot of people, I think, are quite cynical about journalists. You know, that they're all quite unprincipled people, and obviously that's not going to be true. You know, it's like any other walk of life. There'll be people who are like that, and there'll be people who are very principled.
Yeah.
So when I started to read the book, and he was a journalist and all the rest of it, I was starting to think to myself, "Oh God, are we going to go down this route where he turns out to be a proper B, you know, or what's going to happen?" And then it doesn't work out that way, and actually made me feel better about the character. You know, that it didn't go down that route, that he didn't turn out to be, you know, grabbing everything that he could get a hold of.
Yeah. Well, he was a very principled character. His editor and others were not, and that was alluded to in places. And it was something I was thinking, well, if I was to do a follow-up that would start immediately after 2004, or say went from 2004 up to the early noughties, then I could do something that would have a sort of Levison spin on it, and explore the phone hacking and the improper unethical behaviours in journalism. But yeah, he was, I think both he and Sani were, I don't know, are or were, I don't know, do they exist? Who knows? They exist on the page, they exist in my mind. Where are driven people, idealistic to the point of being naive, but they've got a good heart, as they say.
Yeah. No, and I think that kind of comes through for Sani. You know, when she gets her doctorate, and then excuse me. She writes the thing about, you know, the health issues for Surinamese people in, you know, the Netherlands. And I think that showed, you know, that sort of side of her, that there was a caring aspect there, and she wanted to find out more and hopefully be able to find a way of resolving the issues as best as possible.
I don't know so much about that. I think it was that she was hoping to use her skills to be able to offer improvement and betterment to people's lives, as probably most people do, as John himself did as well, because he was an investigative journalist, so he was more driven by let's try and hold truth to power and all those grand things that teenagers seem to hold like a beacon and think, I'm going to change the world. And when they reach our age, they realise, no, the world's going to change it.
Absolutely. I thought as well, the wee kind of twist, you know, where they go to America and he's at this conference and he meets the Italian journalist who apparently it looks as if they're going to turn his career round, and in actual fact she's a bit of a double agent, as they say.
That was something that it wasn't there in the first draft. There were so many things that got added on over the places at various points, and it was just throwing in things like that to keep the challenges going and to allow his arc to build up to the point where it did without wanting to spoil it for anyone who's not read it. Available at Amazon.
No, I think, you know, it is that twist that books need, you know, because sometimes when you're reading a book, it's going along, you know, it's a nice pace, nothing much really happening, you know, and then suddenly something happens, you know, gets thrown into the mix and it turns it slightly. and it keeps the interest going. And for me, I was starting to feel, that, it's a good book, I'm enjoying it, but, what's really going to happen next? And then they go to the US to this conference, and he meets this journalist. And that was the thing that spun it almost 360 degrees.
Interesting that it took you that long to be shaken up, because I was hoping that there were various points along the way that I definitely used to try and incite the characters. So there were various obstacles that John faced earlier on in the book, again, without giving too much away, where his career development was being challenged in relation to a training workshop that he was sitting on, and things like that, where his own ethics were being challenged in relation to the demands of the job. And I think even at that point, you could see that he was under quite a lot of strain, whereas with Sani, her challenges and obstacles they weren't as apparent at that point. Her main goal was really just trying to get into a career that was more meaningful for her. And she found it to be journalism as well.
Yeah, I must admit that was a wee bit of a surprise, But then when I thought about it logically, I could see that it had been kind of leading up to that, because she, there was so much that she did enjoy writing about, and obviously she had, written a piece on the health issues. It kind of showed, there was something there. And then obviously it turns out that she gets the opportunity. Again, as you say, you don't want to give away too much about it, for anybody who's not perhaps read the book. But the whole thing with John, with the incident you were talking about with the training thing, I suppose I probably maybe just put that off as being, the kind of thing that sometimes happens, when people are in particular occupations and they go on training courses and they're maybe full of enthusiasm. But for some reason, that enthusiasm doesn't get encouraged, and in some instances, big hammer gets taken to it.
Yeah. There were so many things that I wanted to try and cover with the book, apart from obviously being able to give me the chance to write about Utrecht. And I've already talked about the idea of how the written word communication can underpin relationships, and that's something that I deliberately and explicitly, although not in an extremely direct way, wrote about at the very start of the book, just to give people a sort of a rationale for why I chose the particular style that I did. And one of the other things I wanted to do was to say, well, this is a story about two people's lives. It's about a relationship, it's about travel, it's about the wider world, it's about how things are changing, etc., etc. But in amongst all of that, they have their own lives, they have their careers. So let's explore how their careers are developing over that time, because that's something that obviously can define people for better or worse, whether it should or should not. And that was something that I deliberately wanted to look at. So the relationship, but also where are they in terms of their career? How do they fit with that? How does that fit in terms of their wants, their needs, their ideals?
Yeah.
And I think that's something that most people can probably relate to.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things I won't say enjoyed, but sort of really brought it home was when you're talking about, in the cafe, and all the people that are smoking. You know, I don't think I have ever been anywhere in the world, you know, in an enclosed space where there would be as much cigarette smoke as I have, you know, when I've been over in Holland.
Yeah. Before the smoking ban came into place, it was bloody awful, to be honest. There was, I cannot ever forget, and I can't remember if it's something that I did actually put into the book or not, but seeing a guy preparing pancakes in a little porta cabin, and he was smoking. I was thinking, what am I going to end up with if there's ash on the pancake? Is that why they put so much stroop on it? Stroop being the syrup. And people in bars that would serve you, they'd come up with a cigarette in hand or in the mouth. It was. It feels like a different world now.
I mean, it made me think at the time when the smoking ban in Scotland came into force, obviously down in England, it wasn't. And I was living in England at the time. And I always remember I had a neighbour who was a long distance trucker, and he often came up to Scotland. And I had him absolutely convinced that he was going to have to stop at a border post, and you know they would take away his cigarettes, and he's like, he wouldn't be allowed over the border.
Wouldn't be a bad thing, to be honest. But the smoking is just a small part of the Netherlands history and culture, and they are. I have always found it quite strange that for people who appear to be so healthy, that so many of them smoke. And what I realised was that, well, first of all, they're tall, probably in part genetically, but also because for generations they've been brought up on cheese. So that helps with bone development and whatnot else. But they also, to a person, they go around on bicycles. They don't, people do drive, but by and large, people, where we would take the bus, they cycle. And when you factor that in, you can see how they do remain so thin and apparently healthy, despite smoking like chimneys.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the other things I wanted to kind of touch on was, obviously there's a long period when you're writing the book, because obviously you'll write it and you'll go back and you'll edit it and you'll revise it and all that sort of thing. But it took a while to get somebody to publish the book. Was that really frustrating?
I actually didn't get anyone to publish it. This is self-published.
Oh, right.
Yeah. It's, as I said, it's the way that the development of it went. I had about 45,000 words or so, I think, by early to mid 2019, and I started punting it to agents in the UK and the Netherlands, because I thought that would be the two best places to try and find someone. And the agents in the UK all came back to a person and said, look, this is interesting, reads really well, however, we don't think there's really a market for stories about the Netherlands and the UK. Okay, so I started going to Dutch agents, and round about the time that we spoke last year, in February, I think it was sitting on the table of a Dutch agent for quite a while, and there were a couple of Dutch agents who considered it in depth, but the comments that they came back with was, this is really interesting, quite novel, if you pardon the pun, but what they were looking for was something that was a little less, was more nuanced, something that wasn't as obviously Dutch, if you see where I'm coming from. So trying to find the balance between having something that was nuanced enough for people to find interesting, but also for people who didn't have the first idea about the Netherlands, trying to bring in the relevant information for them to be able to read it and understand. That was quite a challenge, and that was something that that I just had to try and find a happy balance with. Don't know if it did do, but there you go.
Yeah, I've seen other people, who have written books and they've struggled to get them published, and they've gone down the route of, publishing them themselves. And it was just really, the question was just really, was it easier to get it done for yourself ultimately, or would it have been easier had it been picked up, by an agent and they had run with it?
Again, that's 6.5 dozen. Because I self-published, I had the full control of it. I didn't have anyone saying, "Oh, do that, don't do that, blah blah blah." But the buck stopped with me. So the typos, that's my fault. Can't blame it on anyone else. Although I hope it's historically accurate, and I would be close to saying I would bet my bottom dollar that the historical accuracy of it is 99.9% there, given my skills as a researcher. If I had a publisher or an agent, it would have been easier as well that way, because I would have had the feedback, I would have had the input, I would have had someone saying, "No, don't do that, do this." I would have had people who would have been able to take responsibility for the commercial side of it, advertising it. So I've not had any advertisement other than just basically plugging it on Twitter and sending it to people that I know and telling them about it. So from a commercial point of view, it would have been much easier that way. Artistically, it would have been more profitable as well.
No, that's interesting, because as I said, a lot of people seem to be self-publishing nowadays. I don't know if that's because there are more people writing things, and therefore, publishers can be a wee bit more selective, or if it's just that they've read somewhere or seen a course somewhere where they've been told, pick it up at this point, run with it all the way through, and as you said, you have complete control from beginning to end.
Yeah, it works both ways, as I said. It would have been really great if I had someone to be a sort of a sounding post, and basically the little feedback I got was from the people who had actually read it from start to finish and said, well, not nuanced enough for a Dutch market, and not sure if it would work well in a UK market. So I was thinking, well, what the hell do I do with that? And at the end of the day, I just thought, do you know what? It was, by that point, it was, as I said, it was about July of last year, and I just thought, right, this has been lying around for too long. If no one's going to run with it, I'm just going to post it myself.
Mm.
And it's not going to make any money, not bothered about that. But if some people find it, read it and enjoy it, that's great. And there's a small band of a select few, more people than have fingers, but less than I would like, who have read it, and to a person they've said, this is really good, we enjoyed it, and yeah, and in particular there's a screenwriter in, I don't know where she's based, but she's expressed an interest in it, and I do believe she bought it and she's reading it. And she
Right.
says that there might be a possibility to run with it as a stage play. Whether anything comes of that, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, listen, we're almost out of time. But what I will say is, when we put it up on our YouTube channel, we certainly put links to where, people can get to it. So, anybody that picks it up through the YouTube channel for Indylive Radio, they will get a link that they can click on that will take them to Amazon, to get the book. So, that'll be us doing our wee bit to try and help you, as best we can. But hopefully you do get the opportunity to do the follow-up. And if you do, I would love to read it, because I enjoyed the first one.
That's very kind, because I know you left comments yourself on the Amazon page, and one person in particular said they could see it as being a Netflix series, which I must admit could possibly be, because it's very rich in terms of the way that it's been written. It's very rich in the character development, the point of view, as she said. So you do really get to understand their motives, their drives, what's standing in their way, what they want to be doing, what fails, etc., etc. And that was something that I deliberately, I've not been trained in creative writing at all. My background has been academic research, so the style of writing that I did, this one person who read it, who knows me, said it's much better than the stuff you normally write, because they find it more accessible.
Right.
Well, thank you. Although, and now you can't be doing that laughing towards me, or is it laughing at me? I don't know.
Laughing with you.
Well, that would be a first. But I had to sort of change my writing style when it came to approaching this novel, this piece of work, this project. And one of the things that really helped me was there's various different YouTube people that offer hints and tips on crafting novels and whatnot. But there was one in particular, Lessons from the Screenplay, who takes films and breaks them down and shows the character development, the different stages and development of the film, the arc of the film, and the act structure. So one of the things that I was sort of playing with when I started developing it was, right, I want to do a 5-act structure, thinking that was bloody Shakespeare or someone. And to be fair, I think I have perhaps done that, because Lessons from the Screenplay and others talk about, if you look at the Marvel films, they're really 3-act structures, beginning, middle, end. People are introduced, they face a problem, they overcome it, good triumphs over evil, hurrah! But that really didn't appeal to me. I wanted to do something that was much more, that was going to be more complex, that had various elements and different sort of stages and phases, and having that, trying to fit it into a 5-act structure. I think I perhaps got away with it, but actually looking at a 5-act structure, if you just ignore the pretentiousness of the idea, is basically just a longer version of a 3-act structure.
Well, we have to leave it there, Donald. I could rabbit on with you for a lot longer, but time is running away from me for this Zoom.
Well, I was just warming up.
Well, we'll maybe get to do it again. Thank you very much for agreeing to have a chat with me, and hopefully, everything you wish for with the book comes to being, and I might even get the chance to see it on Netflix or something like that.
Who knows? But it's been fun.
Okay, it's great. Thanks very much for your time. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.
Indylive.radio.